Today we're going to be talking about Stranger Things 1978. Wait a minute, I mean Fear Street 1978. In Fear Street 1994, it ended with our final characters meeting up with the sole survivor of the 1978 massacre at Camp Nightwing. And the sole survivor of the 1978 massacre at Camp Nightwing is telling her side of the story of what happened in 1978 to the characters that are surviving in 1994. We're now introduced to Camp Nightwing of 1978, and already we're getting bombarded with the soundtrack. As this story opens up in 1978, we're introduced to the main character of the story, and this character's name is Ziggy. And as we're meeting her for the first time, we are seeing that she's already being tortured, and she's being bullied, by some camp kids. And she's luckily rescued by some camp counselors. However, they're not liking her too much either, because apparently she has a bad reputation already. I'm not going to regurgitate the plot of this entire show, or this episode, or this movie, whatever you want to call it. However, the main character, Ziggy, she's basically the outcast of the camp. However, she has an older sister who's a camp counselor and actually is trying to be a goody two-shoes, and she doesn't understand why the two of them can't click, because one's trying to better herself and the other one is trying to pull her back down into reality. However, unfortunately, this episode does have a lot of melodrama between the two sisters and also the sister Ziggy, who's actually getting picked on. So there's a lot of conflict and melodrama between those two. The melodrama isn't as annoying as it was in the previous episode between the main character Dina and her girlfriend, and we're seeing more conflict between Ziggy and her sister. Also, the fact that she's also getting more conflict between herself and other camp kids that are on the property. This has a lot more to do with class than anything, because apparently the kids that live in the Shady Side area are maybe the poor kids. So there's a lot of class involvement as far as wealth and whatnot. So our main character is constantly being picked on. There's definitely a lot of nods and a lot of tipping of the hat towards early 1970s and also 1980s slasher flicks. You definitely got a lot of nods and tips going towards Friday the 13th, also Sleepaway Camp. So you got a lot of familiarities between those. I thought that was actually very well done. It was actually not overly done as well. I did appreciate that. I was like, I don't even know if they're doing that on purpose or if they've even seen those movies, because it kind of felt like not too obvious, but it was there. So I was like, okay, that's pretty cool. Also, the soundtrack is actually pretty good too. There are a lot of good classic rock songs from the late 70s. I thought that was good. The soundtrack wasn't overly bombarding like the 1994 one was. I felt like, even though I liked a lot of the music from that 1994 episode, I felt like it was very, very bombarding, I would say. There was oftentimes in the 1994 episode where the characters are walking in and you hear, a 1990s soundtrack in the background. All of a sudden, the character puts on headphones and you hear another 1994 soundtrack. So it's like kind of a little bit too much. And that's when it got me thinking. I was like, I think this is almost over. Not a whole lot has been happening yet. And I was like, did I just get Trojan horsed on this? Because at the end of the episode of Fear Street 1994, we saw the trailer for Fear Street 1978. And it just straight out made you think you're going to be seeing a throwback slasher flick, because it had all these different kills, different montages of kills, and it had the nostalgic Friday the 13th campground kind of atmosphere going for it. So I was all in for it. I was like, okay, I'm looking more forward to this one because it's probably geared more towards me, because I'll be honest, I was not a fan of the first episode. So when I did finally see this, and I was like, okay, we got the campground, we got the establishing characters, we got some character development, and I was like, okay, cool, let's go. But when watching this, I was like, okay, nothing's really happening yet. Okay, I was like, okay, maybe it's a slow burn. But once it kind of started finally happening, I was like, it's not really doing it for me. I don't know if anyone else has noticed the tonal issues with these movies or this show, where I feel like it struggles between like, hey, we want to be a teenage melodramatic CW TV show, but we also want to be a slasher movie, but we don't want to get our hands dirty in order to be a slasher movie. Because I feel like, the melodramatic teenage stuff, which is almost not important at all in this episode or in any of these episodes I've seen, but also like the kills, or, you don't really see much of anything, except maybe like in the last minute of the first episode and maybe something here in the second episode. I almost feel like if you did one little cut, it would be, a CW show. And speaking of not wanting to get your hands dirty, there's, spoiler alert, there's a part of this episode where our characters are trying to climb up from the bottom of an outhouse, And I will say that is the cleanest outhouse I've ever seen, especially if you're coming up from the bottom. Going back to my theory about the Trojan horse, while watching this, I was like, this seems like it's being geared towards the Stranger Things fan base. And while watching it, I was like, this doesn't seem like a young filmmaker who got their big shot by doing a Netflix show. This feels more like a well-oiled machine standing behind the camera, because I thought about it and I was like, okay, Stranger Things is, let's face it, it's done. It's going to be dead in the water very soon if it's not already. I know they're finishing up the last season right now, and it does take 2 years for each episode to come out. Our characters from that show are getting old. They are already growing up. Look at the poster for the next season of Stranger Things. Not to mention, Stranger Things is very expensive to film. Not only to film, but don't forget they also need, like, I'm assuming 6 months to a year to add all the special effects. So I'm assuming that after this season 4, we might get one more season, if that. And I was like, okay, this feels like it's going to be taking place of Stranger Things. Because even while watching Stranger Things when it first came out, that first season was all word of mouth. And, you know, some people caught on later, you know, and I was like, I saw it when it first came out. And, you know, people were not into it just yet. It didn't really catch on until, like, you know, almost a year after. And the fact that Netflix now we're barely on episode 2, and already this week we're already getting pop-up shops, and we're getting all this social media hype, and now like Rotten Tomatoes gave it 90%, and I'm like, I don't know, this seems kind of weird. I'm kind of like not buying it right now. And speaking of well-oiled machines, we've seen this done before where they use the member berries to trigger off the nostalgia cells in your brain, because we've seen that with Star Wars, The Force Awakens, and the member berries were used there.
Oh, hey, you remember Star Wars? Yeah, I remember Star Wars. Oh, you remember Chewbacca? Yeah, I love Chewbacca. Oh, Han Solo, I love him too.
Even with Stranger Things, they use member berries for everything in their show. Especially season 2 through 3. We've seen that all done before. And I feel like Fear Street 1994 and Fear Street 1978 are no better. I feel like Fear Street 1994 was like...
Oh, you remember Scream? Oh, I love Scream. I love Ghostface. Oh, he's so cool. Oh, Drew Barrymore, she's so cool. Oh, Bush. Oh, I love Bush. You remember Bush? Oh, yeah, Glycerine. Yeah, I remember Glycerine.
As far as the Fear Street series goes, you either love it fanatically or you just don't really care about it. And I feel like I'm fitting into the I don't care about it demographic. And I've been hearing people say, well, if you don't read the books, you just don't get it, yada, yada. And people are like screaming irate about it. And I'm like, okay, that's fine. I get that. But I was like, I didn't read the book Jaws, and I love the movie, and it's a damn good movie. So after watching Fear Street 1978, it did not scratch my Friday the 13th itch. It did not scratch my slasher itch. So I'll probably still go ahead and watch the Friday the 13th films, probably 1 through 7. Or I'll probably just go watch Final Girls instead, because that was actually a well-done movie. And we actually deserve a sequel to Final Girls, because I felt like that actually did it better. So don't forget to give me a like and subscribe. I'm Mike the Movie Misfit. I'll see you at the movies.
Get more out of life. Go out to a movie.